This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we look at the Matrix as a picture of the gospel. You are asleep and need to wake up. Your choices matter. Will you take the blue pill of ignorance or the red pill of truth? There is no purple pill. There is a difference between knowing the path and walking the path, and you have the power and authority to go into the world and do good, but it's not going to be easy. Walk with us today as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me live in studio in the house is my friend Dan Horner. Hey, Dan, how you doing, man?
Great, Paul. It's great to be here. It's great to be here, like in the bunker. Like we're in a great
It
bunker.
is. I love this place because it's about 10 degrees cooler than the rest of the house. And so it's especially during the summer when my wife's out on the screen porch working because she likes sweating out there or something. But
I'd be in here.
Exactly. I'm like, this is cooler.
Yeah.
So Dan, I've known Dan for several years. Been doing we call them Mission Uprising Outposts, the boot camp style events, men retreat, whatever label you want to slap on it. But the reason I've been excited, waiting, this is about the third or fourth time we've actually had this on our calendars, because before this, I think before the podcast even was born, I reached out to you and said, hey, dude, I'm starting a podcast. I want to talk about The Matrix. And for you, The Matrix is one of your favorite movies, if not your top number one movie. So why? Why do you love The Matrix?
Well, everyone should love The Matrix, right? Part of it is just when I was a kid, I'm the generation that grew up where Star Wars emerged, right? And so it's like this visualization of a different world. And I've always, as a kid, been called into, my heart kind of opens up to these epic battles between ultimately good and evil. And there are people caught up in that kind of epic story that are regular people that have a role to play. And, for me, whether that was Luke Skywalker, and then there was Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is like this Jedi master who had these abilities and like this connection to the Force that enabled him to be used for good. And, the Jedi were the defenders. And so I just loved that story when I was a kid. And so when The Matrix came out, I remember literally where I was sitting when the first moment, and it was when Trinity was sitting in a room and, you could hear Cipher's voice. Oh, you've been watching him. You like him, don't you? And I was like, okay. Cause I'd heard about the movie, like it was visually cool. And then all of a sudden those police officers come into the room and you kind of don't know, it's dark and her back's to you. And you kind of notice right away, she's got like this super like slick leather outfit on and like, okay. And then I remember when ultimately the agents pull up on the scene and they're like, hey, we're here. And they're like, well, we've already got two groups in there. And
they're already
dead. And I was like, and I was thinking to myself, because at this point, you don't know who's good and bad.
Right.
You really don't. You don't know whether these agents at this point, you think they're just maybe like FBI, and they pull up and all of a sudden when they get ready to handcuff her and she turns around and she breaks the guy's arm. But I remember the moment when she started running on the walls.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, what in the world is going on? I mean, I was like, what is this? Because, at that time, The Matrix changed cinematography, really, right? They were groundbreaking in some of this stuff and the slow motion movements.
Bullet time stuff.
And all of that happened. And so right away, I was just like, what? My wife was like, this is like, looks like the dumbest thing ever. I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever, And so I got pulled into it. And then to at the highest level, Paul, it is the gospel. I mean, it is the message of the Bible put into very contemporary terms that I think people can understand, right? It's a world where human beings are in bondage and don't even know it, thinking they're living their daily lives, going about not knowing that there's this actual evil intent that, you're not really existing.
Right.
We think we are, but we're really not. And there's this group of like this band of, like we would say, band of brothers, but obviously there are women involved, and like this group that's committed to, who actually been pulled into the truth, that now we're going back into the matrix, which the Bible would call the world, to try to bring people to the truth.
Yeah.
And then there's the connection of a hero, and there's many heroes. I mean, I also love the fact that it's just not Neo. It's not like he's this lone wolf out there who becomes the one. No, it took the entire crew of the Nebuchadnezzar to ultimately fulfill the mission. And along the way, people sacrifice their lives. And it's like the Lord of the Rings, very similar. It's a shared journey. But ultimately, Neo had to do what Neo had to do because of who he was. And I just love all of it. And so I love the depth and the breadth. We'll talk about it. It's just that it's such a great, not only movie, it's just a great metaphor that we can connect with really what I believe is so many of the truths of the planet that we've been born onto and the story we've been born into. So I just went on about it, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. We get to talk about it here for the next hour. So it's going to be great.
Well, and this is a movie that there is so much depth and so many layers to it that if we really went diving deep, we could do a 4-hour podcast.
Do you want to do that? I don't know if the listeners would want us to do it for 4 hours.
Yeah,
but we could geek out on it, right?
This may be a multiple, Matrix number 2, Matrix number 3.
I don't think anybody listener-wise would make it to Matrix number 4.
Yeah, then we're digging really deep. And we're not talking about going to Matrix number 3, the what is it, Reloaded, or the third one was a little rough.
We don't want to go there.
We're focusing on the OG, the original Matrix.
Yes.
Because I think for the listeners, everybody's like, yeah, man, this movie was awesome. Like even rewatching the training scenes and the fight scenes, I wrote down in my notes, the training scene is awesome.
Awesome. Sorry.
But then I can almost see him. Yeah, I'm with you. And you're like, wait, this is a picture of the gospel?
Right. Right.
So the gospel. And so let me pull up our first clip.
Okay.
Which I think we've talked about. There's I do this where we talk for about as long as we actually record before the podcast to talk about what we're going to talk about. And we talked about this idea of conversion, of coming to life in Christ, or whatever phrase or term you want to use. And we typically think of it that moment where, if you're the altar call, you raise your hands, you pray the prayer, but it actually starts earlier than that. And we see this in the Matrix with Neo when Trinity shows up and she engages him, and all he gets is a message of follow the white rabbit. And he has a choice, and he can go shut the door, stay home for the night, or he can follow the girl with a white rabbit tattoo and see where that leads. And thankfully, Neo and his curious self, that uncomfortable feeling of, hey, wait, there's something more, because in this scenario, he has 2 lives. He's both Neo, the hacker, and he's Mr. Anderson, Mr. 9 to 5-ish. He's late a lot. But so he follows the white rabbit. He follows the invitation of the Holy Spirit, according to our spiritual filter we're applying to this movie. And he encounters Trinity for the first time.
I know why you're here, Neo. I know what you've been doing. I know why you hardly sleep, why you live alone, and why night after night you sit at your computer. You're looking for him. I know, because I was once looking for the same thing. And when he found me, he told me I wasn't really looking for him. I was looking for an answer. It's the question that drives us, Neo. It's the question that brought you here. You know the question, just as I did.
What is the Matrix?
The answer is out there, Neo. It's looking for you. And it will find you if you want it to.
So obviously at this point, right, it's early in the movie. And what I love is, when the movie opens up, Thomas Anderson is sitting at his computer, basically asleep. And I love that it begins with like this supernatural intervention, which is a statement. Wake up, Neo. He's asleep. So wake up. The Matrix has you. And he comes out of this stupor to see this. And he knows this isn't like how the real world functions. He's trying to escape, like hit escape, like, okay, what is this? But think about that, right? It begins with waking up. And he's at the very beginning of waking up. But then Trinity comes in, like after you had said, Paul, follow the white rabbit, and he does. And that's like these initial promptings, and he starts to like trust those a little bit, right? So as it goes along, he faces many, many choices, as you and I've talked about. But they begin early with kind of not very risky ones. Follow the white rabbit, right? He's like, what's that? And then all of a sudden there's the white rabbit tattoo. And so he kind of, maybe there is something to this. And so then he goes to, this kind of punk rock bar. And what's interesting is those people who got him to that place, they're done. They were like used to get him there, but then we never see those characters ever again, right? They didn't play any role, but that was their role in that moment.
Yeah.
But then enters a primary character, which I love, is Trinity, right? It's like, so we know from the Bible, the Trinity. And so I just love the way that the McKinsey brothers use that in this moment. But what I love about it is, you're looking for him, right? And she said, well, you're really not looking for him. You're looking for an answer. And isn't that really how we come to God? We all have got our stories of how we came to faith, and they're all unique. But ultimately, they all led to the same person.
Right.
For whatever answers we were trying to get. And in this particular situation, he had this splinter in his mind, which is, what's the Matrix? He knows something's not right about the world.
Yeah.
And I think that we all, at some level, as followers of Christ, as believers, as the children of God, God's placed this splinter in our minds that says I'm not satisfied with the world.
Yeah.
And that leads us on a journey to seek answers. And ultimately, the movie plays out in the pursuit of that. It's the pursuit of answering the question, right? And so you had an itch, I've had an itch. But then
there's a cream for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's the cream. Yeah, that's good. But this is a critical moment because this is the stage where so many people can fall off the path.
Yeah.
It's like right here. Every moment's a moment of truth.
When we look around, and I worked in the emergency department, and we see a lot of mental health issues there, especially in teenagers, adolescents, people who all their lives have heard, this is all there is. And when you die, you disappear, you turn to dust. And at that point, you're like, well, what's the point? And again, talking about those questions, those splinters is like, why am I here? Where did I come from? What's my purpose? Surely there's more. And I know that last one wasn't really a question, but I guess the question was, is there more to life than just this bunch of molecules bouncing around? And if we sort of go back to sleep, and by the way, that wake up sleeper is a Bible verse. It's from the Bible.
That's right.
And I'll list that in the resources where exactly that is, because I don't even want to try to remember. I just know it's in there.
That's right. It's there. I agree with you, Paul.
But we can check out, like we see Cipher doing, eating it. He's like, I know this isn't real, but my brain says the steak tastes good. Drinking wine, smoking a cigar, living a good life. That's all I want, is to just make a little make a little name for myself.
Well, I think he says, the ultimate human position of resignation, which is ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
It's this position of resignation. Like, I'm just going to live in ignorance, because in ignorance, I'm just in the matrix. I'm one of the crowd. I just want to live my life, go through existence. I give you an example, like my dad's not a man of faith, and he's happy. He has always enjoyed his life, but he has absolutely no interest. He has no itch. He has no question.
Right.
He doesn't pursue it. And I just can't understand it.
Well, my guess is at one point he did, but what he did was he stuffed it and he killed it or drowned it out, whatever phrase
it was.
you wanted. There was a moment, because we have choices.
Yes.
And as we talked about, as I watch this movie, I see Neo always, he gets confronted with choices, choice after choice after choice. And God's the same way with us. He offers us a choice. And that's the great, you've mentioned before, the great cosmic domino train. But at some point, we have a choice, because God is sovereign and can use even our worst mistakes to bring miracles to life. So God's sovereignty, but our choices matter. Like, those things are things it's like, maybe we'll understand in heaven how that works. And in the movie, just like in life, our choices matter.
Yep. I've told my kids ever since they were little, and they'll tell you if they were sitting here today, I always tell them, in many ways, your life is going to be a byproduct of the choices you do and don't make. Because life is not, a straight line. It's not static. It's dynamic. And God has given us this amazing dignity, but also this amazing, it's very dangerous, which is choice.
Yeah.
And, as we go through this whole story, there are these moments of truth that we'll talk about, that if you go left or right, it does matter.
Yeah.
Right. But that's where, when we know, and I think ultimately, when we step back from the matrix and we think about also our faith, this is where I think ultimately for Neo to arrive where he arrives at, there has to be a level of destiny tied to it. Even in the Lord of the Rings, right? It was this scene where Gandalf was up on the top of the tower. He'd just been defeated, but then ultimately he says there's only one Lord of the Rings, and he will not share his glory with another.
Right.
That's the only time in the movie, which is a Christian-based movie to tell this bigger story, does it go to the bigger truth that there is someone who's above all of this, that ultimately is involved. Because I don't believe, even with Neo's ability to choose, I don't think he would have arrived if there wasn't a supernatural element of destiny and calling on his life to become the one.
Right.
Because we are human. I mean, that's the thing is, you and I would go left every time God told us to go right, because we're just stupid, humans.
Yeah.
But in our lives over time, because God is working in our heart and he's empowered us with the Holy Spirit, his Spirit is moving us to make the decisions to keep us on the path that God has called us into.
Right.
And that's why I get encouraged, because if I just sit back and say, I've got the weight of all of these choices, I can get paralyzed.
Right.
Versus saying, no, in the midst of that, if I live consecrated, if I live a life of following Christ, the white rabbit, following the wild goose, as the Celtic Christians would say, I can rest in knowing that God's not really going to let me fall off ultimately so far off the path that I've lost my sense of purpose and destiny. It doesn't mean we can't have, windy roads, because we do stupid things, but ultimately God is moving us in the direction he wants to move us. I think it should give us encouragement.
Yeah. As you were talking, the line came to me that without freedom, there can be no love.
That's correct.
Like, if your kids, if they always did what you wanted them to do,
and only what I wanted them to do.
Right. We might think we'd be happier.
Right. Yeah, we would. Let's be honest.
But their kids wouldn't know really that we loved them. They just thought, well, I'm doing what he wants me to do. And so they have to actually, with my experience with some of my kids, is when they sort of take a left when I wish they would go right. And I say, yeah, you that's not the path I would have chosen for you, but I love you and I'm here for you. Well, that speaks more to how much I love them And I think it's a lot of the same way with God. It's God doesn't want us to act like robots. He wants us in relationship with him. He wants us to share in that life. So we're going to jump ahead to another choice.
Let's do it.
Neo meets the agents. He flips them off. You know, that's one of those scenes that is really freaky when his mouth disappears. And,
right. He starts to realize that there's something going on, right? Yeah. This is bigger than what I thought. That's the waking up, right? We do have an enemy.
And so they go and Trinity calls him where he's going to go meet Morpheus. On the way, he has to submit to the search because he's got a bug. But Trinity says something really interesting when they say, okay, it's my way, it's our way or the highway. We don't care. And he's faced yet again with another choice.
Stop the car. Listen to me, Copper Top. We don't have time for 20 questions. Right now, there's only one rule. Our way or the highway?
Fine.
Please, Neo, you have to trust me.
Why?
Because you have been down there, Neo. You know that road. You know exactly where it ends. And I know that's not where you want to be.
And I love that because so many men, and as we've been doing the ministry, the outposts, and you see men they open that door and we can tell them, you know, that road is drinking 6 beers a night.
That sucks. That's the sucky road.
It is. Whatever that road is, it could be, pursuing porn. It could be working 80 hours a week. It could be anything. We've
seen it all.
We've seen it all. We've heard it all. You know that road. You know where it ends. And you don't really want to go down it. But there's a submission, right? And that's one of the hardest things for us as men is to submit and to say, okay, I don't know the way. I know that where I am, I don't want to be anymore.
No, Paul, I think you're right. I think that's one of the if you just step back and look at people's stories and lives throughout history of Christendom, most people come to that place. So ultimately, some would say you have to come to the end of yourself. I would say that in many ways, this world, the Matrix, is designed to steal, kill, and destroy. It's the great deceiver, right? When we're young, it's, you and I both have kids of various ages. It's like, well, you're alive. You're young. You're young soul, and you were created to be alive. But over time, you start to realize you're operating within a corrupted system. And that hits people a different way, in different places and different seasons and different times. But ultimately, you kind of you come to the end of eating the crap sandwich, right? And you're like, there's got to be a better way. And I think God allows us as a father to get to that place. You and I, we can talk about it. Hey, we tell our kids, we really think you ought to go right, and they go left, and we've got to allow them to go left and go experience that.
They have to experience the pig pen.
The pain,
right.
Yeah. And I know in my relationship with my wife, that's been a lot of times our conversations, like, no, you want to be like a parent, say, no, don't let them go do that. Like, no, I think we need to let them go do that because that's going to, as our pastor has said, with no struggle, no strength.
Right. Yeah.
And so if we want to grow strong, faith-driven followers of Christ, you have to, I think, go through the struggle. And this is that moment, right, where it's like, do you want to keep following that same pattern, that same path? And in this case, ultimately, how she says, she goes, no, you know it, and you do.
You know where that road goes.
But you don't know it till you know it.
Right.
And in this case, Thomas Anderson is ready.
Yeah.
He's come to that place. He's willing to say, I'm tired of just being this hacker. I'm tired of going through the paces at my job. This really isn't living. And he's called into this great story where he has such a bigger role to play.
And probably, I'm guessing this, where we're heading to is probably your favorite scene of the movie.
I've got several, Paul.
Yeah. If the whole, I literally have about 12 clips pulled. So it's like, I tell the people who come on, I was like, I pull a lot of clips. It's like a buffet. We're going to pick and choose and just sort of follow where the wild goose leads us during this conversation. Because we reach that point. We say, no, I know where that road leads. I'm willing to submit. You know, they do this weird thing with the pulling the bug out, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I thought that was a dream or a nightmare."
You mean that's real?
Again, that whole idea of waking up.
Yes.
And he goes, and now he's going to go meet Morpheus. And really, this is just a picture of God meeting us. You know, and I love that vision of Neo's been pursued for longer than he knows. He's been watched. There's been people interested in him more than he's been aware of, just like us.
Right.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Well, we're both sitting here just grinning. Like, we can't wait. This is this moment. And then where he talks about there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. I think those are the critical moments. But in this one in particular, Paul, I mean, I would speak to our audience. I would like to speak to two different groups. One is, if you're not a believer, if you literally sit and meditate and hear the words that Morpheus in this movie just says to Thomas Anderson,
you are a slave, Neo.
This is what the Bible is telling us. It is completely what the Bible is telling us. So if you want to say, is the Bible an ancient book or is it current? Well, no, it's as current and relevant as what we just heard. It said, but for those who have this feeling, right? And we could say that's the prompting of the Holy Spirit. That's this hole in the heart that will not be filled anything apart from God who created us. And then you could say, well, I don't even believe that God's a creator. Okay, well, do you have this feeling? Do you just sense that something's wrong with this world?
Yeah.
I mean, we would say in America today, there's something wrong with the world.
True.
Right? And if you're only living within the matrix with the matrix perspective, you'd be like, oh yeah, the world's kind of messed up right now. No, but if you step back and you think like, no, something is wrong. I had this feeling it's wrong. Something's wrong with the world. And then he shifts it exactly to what Jesus would say to us is, we're being blinded from the truth.
The world is being pulled over your eyes.
It is.
Yeah.
And we're being blinded from what? The truth.
Yeah.
And we live in a world, I mean, even in the Bible, Pilate said, what is truth? Well, here we are 2,000 years later, and we would say it's probably even gotten worse, that there's this selective truth, and there's some would say the suppression of truth. And America was like this little oasis for a period. Well, that's not the case anymore. I mean, people are questioning everything. Like, what is that? That's the matrix. It's trying to keep us from having confidence that there's truth. And then he says the truth in what? That we are all slaves.
Yeah.
Guess what? We've been born into a system that the Bible says is against human beings, to steal, kill, and destroy human beings.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to be kept from waking up to.
Like you mentioned earlier, that bondage of, if we have right turn, left turn, that bondage says we're unable to turn towards God. We can't. It's not even in our it's not in our
the
programming.
Matrix, you're never going to do it.
Yeah. It's not even, it's like, doesn't exist.
Well, because think about it. That's where God has to intervene.
Exactly.
To your point. And I love how you said that, Paul. It was, somebody was watching Thomas Anderson long before Thomas Anderson really got these questions. But the questions also were part of why Morpheus was watching Thomas Anderson to see, is he going to respond to these promptings and this sense that something's wrong with the world, right? So that's how God, absent God, entering into this system that we've been born into, the world, the Bible will say, the Matrix, the movie would call it, we are in bondage. We are blind to the truth, right? And so then what I love, though, is then he shifts it. He's like, no one can tell you what it is. You must experience it for yourself. And I love when he presents the blue pill and the red pill, and he says, all I'm offering you is the truth.
Right.
And at that moment, the question is, do we really want it or not? Because we're about to find out as the movie shifts forward, the truth isn't like living in the truth and knowing the truth. The Bible says with much wisdom comes much sorrow.
Yeah.
That as we kind of learn like the tragedy of what's really happening in humanity on this planet and how the enemy really is just destroying human beings. If you have any compassion or love in your heart, it breaks your heart. Yeah. And that's where then it's about people who've gotten pulled into that truth. The truth can be ugly. But then you really do come to a sense of sobriety about you have a role to play now. And I think that I know for myself, it took me many, many years, decades as a Christian to move past seeing myself as a consumer. Like Christianity is something I consume.
Right.
I benefit from this relationship to I'm the Matrix and Wild at Heart were like my catalyst to help me see that no, I'm called into this epic story and I do have a role to play, but I must make a choice.
Yeah.
And now I would switch and say, if you are a believer and you're a guy like we experience all the time who's kind of just going through the motions.
Yeah.
You have this itch. Do you feel it? Something's wrong. Something's not only wrong in the world, but something just seems to be wrong in your faith journey. It's just not calling you. It's not having you come alive as a man. And you actually could be the opposite. You kind of feel neutered. You kind of feel like you're sitting in your place, and you're not doing, you're not achieving, you're not having the sense of calling and identity and purposefulness. Well, this is your moment. That's what Paul and that's why we're doing this, is try to wake people up, and not only wake up non-believers, but wake up believers that it's a much bigger story. It is an epic adventure. There's good versus evil.
There's abundant life.
There's an abundant life, but you got to be willing to want it and pursue it, which is where we're at in the journey. This is the turning point, right? So we talked about the initial calling. Now this is the turning point. And the last thing I'd say to those who are believers who are listening to this podcast, which I think it may be 1 billion. So to the billions of believers who are listening to Paul and myself today, here's the other thing I'd say is we find is when you come to this place and it's like, okay, I've got the blue pill in one hand. I can just go with the world. Ignorance is bliss. And I just don't want to deal with the truth. But I'm red. I have faith. And I really do believe that there's a God who is real. And Jesus is this hero that's entered the story. And apart from him, I have nothing. But where most of us can live is the tension of purple. Yeah. I want to create purple. I
want a purple pill.
I want a purple pill. And they're like, sorry, in this case, Morpheus didn't provide a third pill. And Jesus tells us in the scriptures, he says, listen, it's pretty simple. He goes, I either want you to be hot or cold.
Yeah.
He said, because if you're going to try to be lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. And that's purple. And unfortunately, I think if you're kind of a believer, if you come into the faith in Christ, I think the scriptures are clear. You can't lose your salvation. But if you're not red, then you're purple. So you're living in this place of lukewarmness that Jesus says, honestly, I can't do anything with that. And what you and I would say after all of the years we've been on this shared journey together and the lives that we've seen change through the work that we've done with calling men into a story like this is, man, the red pill, it's not easy, but man, is that where you will come alive as a man, your faith will come alive, where God will become real in your life in a way that you never imagined. And so
you'll
that's what we're
find out how deep the rabbit hole goes. You can find out how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? And so that's why you and I are doing this, because we have been on that journey for several years, and it's transformed both of our lives. Because like you said, it's not easy. He wakes up, he's been rejected by the system. Because by the way, that's what happens. When you take the red pill, you get rejected by the world. He ends up, it's not an easy life. He has to basically rebuild his muscles. He has to learn. He's like, why do my eyes hurt? You've never used them before. You have to learn. You have to become who you were meant to be. And that's all in there too. We are God's masterpiece, his poema, like master epic poem, this work of art that he created, not to hang in a gallery, but to be a power, not a power source, but a powerful
presence,
right? To do good works, to do the stuff that God planned for us before the creation of the world. Again, somebody knew, they're like, oh my gosh, just wait till you see what Dan and Paul are going to do. And we've got a cloud of witnesses watching us saying, yeah, this looks bad now. Cause the movies, whatever movie you watch, there's always the part where it's like, oh, it looks dark. And Britt says, that he'll stop the movie and tell his kids, yep, that's the end of the movie.
That's the world story.
Yeah, and this one, it's like, yep, Neo just got shot. That's the end. Super bummer, right? But no good story ends there.
Except the real world. I mean, that's the story that we live in. They basically said that's what happens. Oh, and then all the good people die.
Yeah.
And the bad people die too, and it's just over.
Yeah, there's no purpose. There's no point. You didn't come from anything. You've got there's nobody looking out for you. You've got to make it on your own. And those are all the lies.
Well, and Paul, I think to give a framework for that, briefly is, we've said that, and I love this, it's music is the language of the spirit, right? So we think of worship, we think of music. Music creates worship in our spirit, but the language of the heart is story.
Yeah.
And that's why all of us as human beings love stories, whether that's books or whether that's movies. We get drawn into stories. Well, why is that? Well, because we're living in a story.
Right.
And to your point, it's like almost like the waking up moment is like, if you're listening to this podcast and you're just like looking at the world and you're like, what's the storyline that the world is presenting you on a daily basis? It's such a small story. And then ultimately, like you said, in the big moment, like everybody dies and just all the good's gone, that the bad people are gone too. And it's just every time it just kind of, the eraser board comes out and wipes everybody out and we start over. Well, is that really what's on your heart? Do you not feel like that that's it? There's not more?
Yeah.
Right? We know that there's more because we would never go to a movie that ended the way that the world wants to tell human beings that we're supposed to live in that story. Yeah. We would never pay for that movie.
No, it's not an enjoyable experience. You're just like, oh, this is a bummer.
Right. Well, how many movies do we go to when it has a tragic ending and everybody hates them?
Right. You're like, or they say, oh, that was so artsy, but nobody watches it again.
Nobody hates it.
So Neo comes alive, basically. He wakes up literally, from his little cocoon, their battery power. He goes through his training again. Freaking awesome. And, if you look at Neo as a new believer, he needs training. He needs knowledge. He's like, well, okay, so I'm awake now. I need reorientation because everything I've ever known, I can't really trust. So what is true? And so he and Morpheus go into this construct, this sort of blank slate where it's his training ground.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. The Matrix is a computer-generated dream world, built to keep us under control in order to change a human being into this.
No. I don't believe it. It's not possible.
I didn't say it would be easy, Neo. I just said it would be the truth.
Stop. Let me out.
Neo's doubting his. He's like, why didn't I take the blue pill? And what Morpheus holds up is a battery, because that's basically what the humans are being used for. And we're not going to super spiritualize and try to force stuff, but it's a system. You know, we talked about that is the new God is science. It's like, oh, it's what you can taste, feel, smell, touch. That's what's real. But that leaves off so much of, as they like to say, the human experience.
Right.
Because what is love? What is beauty? What is sorrow or tragedy or trauma? Those are things that you can't really label.
You can't put those in the test tube.
No. And so you've got things that science can't explain. And so what is real?
Right. And I think just kind of hitting this point quickly, Paul, is, and I like what you said in teeing up this clip, which is it's a reorientation. You know, you've come to faith, you've been woken up. And like he even said, like, why do my eyes hurt? Because you've never used them. And so when you enter into faith, your faith eyes have never really fully been used. You're coming into awakening to the truth. And I love your word, a reorientation. And as he said here, you know, what is the matrix? The matrix, in this example, the system is set up to turn human beings into a battery, right? That these machines can use to survive. Well, what does the Bible say? The world, the system of the world, the software, as we like to say, of the world that everybody's running on is to destroy human beings.
Right.
It's not that we become a battery. It's that we literally just live a life and die. That is what the enemy wants, because the Bible tells us that we have a real enemy who has been judged, who knows that he ultimately is going to go into eternal existence apart from God. And that the Bible calls hell. And it's not a good place because there's no life there.
Because there's no God there.
There's no God there. And so if there's no God there, there can be no life. And so today people are sitting in a world where there is life because God created the life. You know, as we say, the hardware God created, and Satan has entered into the story and written the software that everybody's living
kind of like
off
a
of.
virus in a computer program.
It's like a virus in a computer program, right? That's exactly it, Paul. And so that's, I think, here is the reorientation to realize I have an enemy who really does want to steal, kill, and destroy my life and those I love. And learning then to say, okay, what do I do in a world now that I realize that evil is real? And not only conceptually real, but I mean, my life, my faith life really got amplified in a positive way when I realized, and he was coming after me, and he had been coming after me. And he had been, a lot of the bondage and the brokenness that I had in my life was because he had been coming after me. He was coming after my family. He was coming after my children. So as a man, my heart, my warrior heart, got amped up like, okay, it's time for me I better get trained.
Yeah.
Right. And so we said ignorance, you know, I like to say that people listening to this, you know, regardless of what you choose to believe or not believe, will never change what's true. It'll never change what's true.
Yeah.
So I cannot want it to be true. And that's what Neo's going through. He says, this isn't real. This can't be real. And Morpheus is kind of apologizing, like, well, I told you I was going to show you what was real.
Didn't say it'd be easy.
I didn't say it's going to be easy. And so, you know, that's where we see there's another choice that many men have to make in their faith journey. It's like, do I want to cut a deal and put my head back in the sand and replug me into the matrix? And I want to go back into ignorance.
Yeah.
Because this is tough. But what we would say is, no. This is what you have, what it takes. You're called into this strength place. You have a role to play. And oh, by the way, the Bible also tells us Jesus has empowered us to defeat the enemy. In the analogy of the Matrix, God's empowered us through authority in Christ to beat the agents.
Right.
That's our journey. Our journey it's the same thing for Thomas Anderson. We know it's going to be a long podcast because there's just so much breadth and depth to it. Thomas Anderson ultimately is the one who's got to take down the agents, because if you can't beat the agents, you can't break the Matrix. Right. And so we needed Jesus to enter the story to beat the agents, which is the demonic forces of darkness. And he was greater than them, but he had to be from the system. Right. So he had to be human.
Yeah.
Right. Because when we learn the story in the Matrix from the Oracle and from Morpheus, there was this original one who had the ability to basically break the rules of the Matrix. Well, Jesus enters the story as a human and defeats sin, which is what causes human beings to have to die. Well, he defeated it. So therefore, he has beat the system. And now he says, I've empowered you to go and to do the same. And so we have so much authority. We have so much ability as followers of Christ to go and to bring good into the world, but it's going to resist us. And that's why the training and all of the things that Morpheus is teaching Neo how to fight is critical, because we all have to go back into the world. We got to be in it, but not of it.
Right.
But we have to learn how to fight. And so that's the key component here is for the men listening to this, you've got to learn how to fight. And that's a lot of things we do at our outposts, is helping equip men to understand how to fight.
Well,
and
it's
how to
that
have
reorientation.
Victory. Yes,
right?
Exactly. It's the reorientation.
So I know our time's getting short.
I'm coming back. We're
doing Matrix Part 2.
Friday or tomorrow or Saturday. I'm back. We're back here. We got to do it.
So I feel like we can put a bow on this, because I want to play what he says at the end. Because like you mentioned, at the end, Morpheus becomes an archetype of Jesus, even to the point where he has to die. And in this scenario, Mr. Anderson had to die so that Neo could live. And by the way, it's the same for you and me. Old Paul had to die. Who I was 10 years ago, unrecognizable to who I am today.
Right. I agree with that. For the listeners, I just want you to know that this is not the same guy from 10 years ago. Literally, this is a new creation.
Yeah. I look back at that and talk about cringeworthy.
Me too. Trust me.
And so going back to that idea of Neo as Jesus, he gets shot. He comes back to life. He shuts down. He breaks the Matrix.
He's resurrected.
Because the Matrix has no power over him, just like the world has no power over Jesus or us anymore once we've been set free. He makes a phone call at the very end of the movie.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible.
And that is such a rich statement, because that's what Jesus came to do. And that's what we're called to do. I'm going to show them a world without you, and you being the enemy, you being the system. A world with man, this would be impossible. But with God, everything is possible. I'm going to show them the impossible, is what he says in that clip. And that's our role as men. We have a choice. We can pursue it. We can follow Jesus. We can follow the white rabbit, the wild goose, and see how deep the rabbit hole goes. Or we can be like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm going to Netflix and chill.
Right. Well, Paul, what I love about this, how they ended, the first of the trilogy, which is really, there's no reason to watch the second or the third. Because the story was really done well in the first Matrix. It literally is kind of the gospel, and then now we got to go live in that, right? And it's the same thing for us. Jesus calls us out of the matrix, out of the world. He calls us into the truth. He then is training us up in how to live a life empowered through the Holy Spirit to go back into the matrix, to not only live our life, but also to set others free. And, he is the forerunner.
Yeah.
Right? So in this moment, he's the forerunner who's broken the matrix, but he's calling others into it. And that's why I like this. It's like, hey, we're called into this purpose. We're called into this path. And as Morpheus has said, there's a difference, a fundamental difference in life between knowing the path and walking the path. And I think that many, many men can, I know I found myself in a very good church years ago with a good pastor and good intended pastor, good relationships, but there was no life really there.
Yeah.
And I was knowing about God. I was learning 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 about the life with God, but I wasn't living a life dynamically following God. And that's where this is so transformational. That's why at our outpost, that's our primary theme. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And we call people into walking this path. And that's what Neo's doing here at the end. He says, basically, I'm letting you know, right? Because don't you love it when Jesus, before he was crucified and resurrected, where we knew he was empowered, he got a little insight from the Father when he gave his authority to his disciples to go out and start doing things in his name. And when they came back and they said, oh, Jesus, this is really cool, man. The demons are even submitting, right? And so he saw that the Father was going to enable his authority to be passed on to his followers. And what did Jesus say in that moment? He says, I just saw Satan fall from heaven. Right? I just saw him fall. The Father has created the way for good to win. Yeah. And it's just not the act of Jesus. Like that's the beginning. As he said in this is just the beginning. Now my followers are going to move into the world. And I think one of the things as we kind of wrap up this journey we've been on is, if you think about that, Jesus, this is the beginning of a movement where we tend to think, I think at times as, and now we're speaking to anybody listening to this who would classify them as a Christian or a believer in Christ, that, oh, I've been born into a world where the default setting is good. No. It's the complete opposite. We've been born into the matrix, which is a set against us. We must now go. We've been called out of the world. Now we got to go back into it. It is going to resist us. It's going to hate us. But Jesus says, oh, don't lose heart. I've overcome this thing, right? And that's why I also love, he tells us all the time, I've told you in advance, so don't lose heart.
Yeah.
And we would say that, many people listening to this could have lost heart in the midst of the journey because it's tough.
Yeah.
And if you did take the red pill, you probably at some point, because you didn't get trained, got your butt kicked.
Yeah.
And you're like, I think I want to go back and eat a steak and just have a good, glass of wine and smoke a cigar. And that's understandable, but we're here calling people into this because what the kingdom needs more men who've come fully alive and understand what we have available to us in and through Christ. He's given us that authority. And I know in my life on a daily basis, I wish I were walking and living more on a daily basis with that sense of authority. Jesus gives us the great news. He said, submit yourself to me. So we're under his lordship, resist the devil. And he'll flee. He says not only flee, he must flee.
Yeah.
The enemy doesn't have a choice.
Right.
But if I don't understand the submission, then I don't have any power.
Right.
And so The Matrix is such an amazing movie. I think every believer should listen to our podcast, Paul. Including everybody. Like all everybody. Believers at all levels. And, but I think that The Matrix in many ways completely, God used this story to change my life and totally change the way I see the world and the way I see my role in the world.
Well, if you're listening and you're like, man, I can't believe it's over already. There's so much more. You're right. There is so much more to this. And I'm sure I'll be hassling Dan about doing Matrix 2.0, not Matrix 2.
2.0.
Yeah, or 201 maybe. We'll go to the next level of the Matrix.
Part 2.
Yeah.
Matrix 1, Part 2.
So Dan, thanks for stopping by the office.
Yep.
And spending this time with me, and it's been great, and I look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Paul. You're doing a great work.
Thanks. So if you guys want to check us out on our website, I'm going to put resources. I'm going to put a link to the Outpost if you guys are in the North Carolina, South Carolina area and would like to join us. I'll put a link to that website for more information. And also, all the quotes and the verses, because I don't always attribute any quotes I used correctly. So I do that. I use the website for my corrections, and that's minutethemovies.com/podcast. So I hope you join us next week here on the Minute the Movies podcast.
Do you believe it now, Trinity?
Morpheus. The Oracle. She told me
She told you exactly what you needed to hear. That's all. Neo, sooner or later you're going to realize, just as I did, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?